There are stories that grip you with action, and then there are stories that reach quietly into your soul and stay there. This, dear viewers of Vale Marks, is one of the latter. What would you do if a wounded pit bull showed up in the rain, dragging a bloodied child's backpack, and refused to leave until someone followed? This isn't just a rescue tale. It's about memory, about loyalty, and the kind of love that doesn't give up even when the world does. Watch until the end. The message this dog carries might change the way you see silence. It was the kind of rain that seemed to soak not just your clothes, but your thoughts too cold, persistent and unforgiving. The town of Elk Valley, tucked quietly into the foothills of northern Oregon, wasn't known for drama. Life moved slowly here, and most of the time, the only sounds after midnight were the hum of porch lights and the occasional groan of an old truck engine trying to make it home. But at 2:47 in the morning, something unusual broke the silence. Sheriff Eli Harper had just poured himself a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee. The office was quiet, too quiet maybe. Rain slapped the metal awning just outside the window, and the only light came from the old amber bulbs flickering on the porch of the small station house. He had been alone for most of the night. It wasn't uncommon. Elk Valley didn't get many calls, and those they did get were usually about lost dogs or raccoons raiding garbage bins. He was just about to sit when he saw the figure low, slow-moving crossing the parking lot. At first he thought it was a shadow, a trick of light, but then it moved again, dragging something behind it. Harper straightened, setting his coffee aside. The dog emerged from the rain like a ghost. A pit bull, thin to the point of frailness, with ribs pressing against its soaked coat and a fresh tear on one ear. Its eyes were dark and wide, not wild, but focused alert in a way that made Harper's stomach knot before he understood why. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. It stopped 3 feet from the steps, dropped something on the concrete, and looked up. Harper stepped out from under the eave. The rain hit his shoulders instantly. He ignored it. There, on the ground, was a child's backpack. Purple. Torn. The kind with glittery patches and a half-ripped name tag. And smeared across the front of it mud. And something else. Something darker. Blood. Harper knelt down slowly. The dog didn't move. He reached forward with gloved hands, picked up the backpack, turned it over gently. A name was stitched in faded pink thread along the side pocket. Maya Ellison. Maya, 9 years old, reported missing just 15 hours earlier. Last seen walking home from school, a few blocks from her grandmother's trailer. A dozen volunteers had already searched the area. Drones. K9 units. No sign. Just a faint trail that disappeared at the edge of the woods. Now here it was, her backpack, delivered by a dog that looked like it had crawled out of hell. Harper rose slowly, eyes still locked on the pit bull. The dog stared back, unmoving, rain dripping from its nose. It didn't flinch, didn't retreat. There was no fear in its posture, only exhaustion. And something else. Intent. The kind of gaze Harper had only seen in veterans. In people who had seen things they couldn't explain but remembered anyway. He opened the door to the station. The dog didn't follow. It stood its ground, as if waiting. Harper reached for the desk phone. "Jenny," he said when the other end picked up, "I need you here." Now, Jenny Clark arrived 10 minutes later, raincoat over her uniform, ponytail damp, boots squeaking against the linoleum as she stepped inside. Harper gestured to the window. "He's out there." Jenny moved to the door and looked out. When she saw the dog, her expression changed. Her breath caught audibly. "I've seen him before," she whispered. Harper looked over. "Where?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes were on the dog. "That's Ranger." "He was a therapy dog?" 2 years ago, I volunteered at Brookpine Senior Home. He used to visit every Thursday with a woman named Danielle. Always calm. Always on time. Until one day, he stopped coming. Harper stepped closer. "What happened?" Jenny shook her head. "She went missing." Danielle. It was ruled a domestic issue boyfriend disappeared too. No charges filed. Ranger just vanished. They were both quiet a moment. Outside, the dog waited, unmoving. Harper ran a hand through his graying hair. "Well, he's back," And he brought us something. Jenny opened the door and stepped out. Ranger didn't retreat. He simply watched her, unblinking. She knelt in the rain, met his eyes. "Where is she?" she whispered. As if understanding, Ranger turned his head toward the woods. Then he looked back at them, took one step forward, and waited. Jenny stood, rain dripping from her chin. "He wants us to follow." Harper stared out at the trees beyond the lot. Black shadows curled between them. Mist clung to the trunks like old secrets. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, with a sigh that carried the weight of years and regrets, he turned back toward the office. "I'll get the truck." The rain hadn't let up, but neither had the dog. Ranger stood still in the misty lot, muscles tense beneath his wet coat, his gaze shifting only when the headlights of the fire rescue truck blinked on. The engine rumbled softly, casting a faint warmth through the fogged windshield. Inside, Jenny Clark sat in silence, hands resting on her lap, eyes fixed on the dog she hadn't seen in over 2 years. Ranger. The name came back like an echo, a whisper from a time that felt both recent and impossibly far. As the wipers brushed away the curtain of rain, Jenny finally broke the quiet. "I knew him," she said softly, almost to herself. Sheriff Eli Harper glanced over from the driver's seat, but didn't speak. He knew better than to interrupt when someone was peeling back memory. Jenny's voice grew stronger, more certain. "His name is Ranger. He was a therapy dog at Brook Pines. You remember that place? Up off Route 6 before they shut it down." Harper gave a slow nod. "Senior home. Closed after the fire hazard violations." Jenny exhaled. "Yeah, that one. I used to volunteer there during the summers. He'd come in every Thursday morning like clockwork. Same time, same pace. Head held high, eyes calm. He wasn't like the other dogs that visited. He didn't need treats to behave or commands to follow. He just knew where to go, who needed him most." Harper let her talk. The way her voice softened wasn't lost on him. He had seen Jenny in uniform, in fire gear, in chaos, but this version of her, the one speaking like a daughter remembering a childhood friend, was different. "Most of the residents adored him," she continued. "But there was one in particular, an old man named Will. He had late-stage Parkinson's, barely spoke, didn't recognize his own son anymore. But every time Ranger came by, Will would smile. Just a flicker. But it was real. The nurses used to say Ranger had a clock inside him, like a ranger on duty. Always there, always watching." "That's where he got the name?" Harper asked quietly. Jenny nodded. "It wasn't his first name. The staff just started calling him Ranger, because every morning after his visit, he'd walk out the back fence, down the trail behind the property, and sit at the edge of the woods. Always the same spot, same time." Like he was keeping watch, Harper looked out the windshield. Ranger was pacing now, not out of nervousness, but as if trying to decide whether the humans were worth trusting again. Jenny's tone shifted slightly. "Then one week he didn't come." There was a pause. "They said the woman who usually brought him in, Danielle Reed, had stopped showing up. She wasn't staff, just a volunteer. Sweet, soft-spoken. Used to read books to the residents. She and Ranger were inseparable. You could see it. That kind of bond, you don't fake that." "What happened to her?" Harper asked. Jenny sighed. "Police reports said she had a boyfriend, Raymond Tucker. Bit of a drifter. Nothing violent on record, just unstable. One night, there was a call to their house. Neighbors heard shouting, but when officers arrived, no one was there. The place was torn up. Signs of struggle. Blood on the floor. But no bodies. Was Ranger there?" "No," she said quietly. "He was gone too. We all thought maybe they were both taken. Or maybe the dog ran off." Harper's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. Jenny looked out again, her voice quieter now. "After that, people started spotting him, wandering near the woods behind Brook Pines. He wouldn't let anyone catch him. Animal control tried once he disappeared before they got close. But every morning, someone would say they'd seen him, sitting, watching. Like he was waiting for Danielle," Harper said. Jenny nodded. "Some folks thought it was just habit," she added. "But I don't buy that. Dogs don't cling to routine for years unless it means something. And Ranger, he was different. Always was. They sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the gentle clicking of rain on the roof. Then Harper leaned forward slightly, eyes never leaving the Pitbull, who now stood still again, tail low, head high, watching them both. That dog dragged a bloody backpack to our door, from who knows how far, through this rain. With that limp, Jenny nodded. And didn't run when you opened the door. Harper turned off the engine. You think he remembers? I don't think he ever forgot, Jenny said. I think he's been waiting for someone to finally listen. Outside, Ranger took one step toward the tree line. Then another. He looked back once, not to check if they were coming, but as if to say, "You ready?" Harper opened the door and stepped out. Rain immediately soaked through his coat. He didn't flinch. Jenny followed. As they approached, Ranger didn't move. He simply stood, eyes bright beneath the porch light, ears tilted forward, his breath fogging in the cool night air. Harper knelt slowly beside him. The dog didn't look at him. He stared at the woods, as if the trees still held something unfinished. "If you still remember," Harper murmured, "then lead the way." And without a sound, Ranger turned and started walking toward the trees, the mud, and the memory that had been waiting for someone brave enough to follow. The rain softened to a light drizzle as they entered the woods, but the fog hung low and heavy, curling between the blackened stumps and scorched trunks like it had never left. 2 years ago, a wildfire had torn through this part of Elk Valley, swallowing 30 acres in under a day. What remained was a graveyard of trees, some still upright but lifeless, others fallen and left to rot in a tangle of limbs. Moss had begun to creep back in patches, but the land still smelled of smoke. Even after all this time, Ranger moved ahead of them without hesitation. He wasn't sniffing wildly or zigzagging like a dog chasing random scents. No, his steps were measured, purposeful. His path wasn't the shortest, it was the familiar, like someone retracing footsteps long memorized. He moved with the same focus Harper had seen in seasoned search and rescue dogs, but there was something deeper in the Pitbull's stride. This wasn't just a mission, it was a memory. Harper, walking just behind, wiped moisture from his brow and watched Ranger cut up a small incline, a trail so faint it could have been missed in daylight, let alone before dawn. "You see that?" he said under his breath. "That's not wandering. That dog's following a map only he can see." Jenny didn't answer at first. Her eyes were scanning the terrain, but she heard him, and she felt it too. They reached a ridge littered with burned pine needles. The earth crunched underfoot, the sound dull and soft. Jenny slowed slightly, her fingers brushing the wet bark of a half-dead tree. She hadn't been here since the fire. Her chest tightened as the landscape pulled memories from beneath the surface, flashes of orange flame cutting through the trees, radio chatter echoing through her helmet, her father's voice over the comm. And then silence. He'd been part of the team fighting the fire that day. A volunteer firefighter. A good man. They never found his body. Just the melted remnants of his badge. The blaze had moved too fast. Jenny blinked away the memory. She wasn't here for that. Ranger was waiting at the bottom of the slope, tail low, ears forward. When she caught up, he resumed walking just a few steps ahead. Always enough to lead, never too far to lose. The deeper they went, the more Jenny began to feel something unsettling but familiar, the way time shifts in the woods. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the darkness here felt thicker, not just from the trees or the fog, but from what had been left behind. Trauma soaks into the ground sometimes, into the stones, into animals. She watched Ranger pause near a cluster of downed logs. He sniffed the ground, then turned slightly to the left and began moving again, quicker now. Jenny and Harper followed, their boots sinking slightly in the damp moss. And then he stopped. They saw it at the same time. At the edge of the trail, just beyond a charred tree stump, was a small shoe. Yellow, mud splattered. The kind with Velcro straps and a cartoon sun printed on the side. Jenny knelt carefully and picked it up with gloved hands. The shoe was soaked through, but on the inside edge was a thin smear of blood, just a trace. Enough to know it was real. Next to the shoe, almost hidden beneath leaves, was a scrap of white cloth. She lifted it gently. A child's handkerchief. Embroidered in tiny purple thread were 5 letters, Maya. Her throat tightened. She was here, she whispered. Ranger stood a few feet away, watching. Harper stepped up beside her. We're not searching, he said, almost to himself. We're being led. Ranger gave 2 short, sharp barks. Then he turned sharply, left this time, and trotted ahead faster now, tail stiff, body tense. Jenny stood, her eyes still on the handkerchief in her hand. You think he's been here before? I think he never left, Harper replied. They pressed on, following Ranger through a narrow bend where the trees grew tighter together. The ground was soft, the moss thicker here. It muffled their steps. Jenny couldn't shake the image of the dog coming here day after day, alone, returning to the same places, walking the same paths. Not for food, not for safety, for memory. It occurred to her then that Ranger wasn't just a survivor. He was a witness to something no one else saw. And unlike most witnesses, he never stopped trying to be heard. Harper called ahead gently, Ranger, what do you see? The dog stopped again, this time by a large stone slab nestled against the hillside. He sniffed the air, ears pinned back, then let out a low, grumbling sound, not a bark. A warning. Or maybe a signal. Jenny stepped forward, then froze. There was something just beyond the stone. A trail of disturbed leaves. A broken branch. Something had passed through here recently. Harper's voice dropped. We're getting close. Ranger moved to the edge of the trail, lowered his head to the ground, and let out a long breath, as if bracing for what came next. Jenny watched him, her heart thudding, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was just on a search. She felt like she had joined a pilgrimage. The wind shifted just as they crested a ridge, bringing with it a sharper chill and the unmistakable scent of something more human than wild old food, sweat, and something darker beneath it. There, Harper said, his voice low. Between 2 warped pine trunks stood a crude shelter. Not a proper cabin, not even a hunting shack. It looked thrown together, patchy blue tarp sagging across the top, tree limbs wedged into the ground for makeshift walls, and one corner reinforced with old fencing wire. It was just enough to keep out the wind, but not the world. Jenny felt her stomach tighten. Her boots crunched softly on damp soil as she approached, her hand hovering near her flashlight, the other resting loosely by her sidearm. Ranger, a few feet ahead, had stopped moving. He stood like a statue, nose to the wind, ears angled slightly back. No growl, no bark. But tension radiated off him in waves. Harper stepped ahead and gently lifted a flap of tarp that served as the door. His flashlight flicked on, casting a narrow beam across the inside. The space was small, no more than 10 feet across, and smelled of mildew and rust. An empty chip bag fluttered in the corner. A water jug lay sideways, its contents long spilled into the dirt floor. In the far corner, a rumpled wool blanket was laid out like a nest. Nearby, a few torn pieces of fabric, like someone had tried to make a pillow, but it was the stain on the blanket that made Jenny freeze. She stepped closer, crouching down as Harper scanned the rest of the space. The stain was old, but still visible, faintly brownish red, dry, but unmistakably blood. Her eyes moved to something half buried beside it, a length of frayed rope, curled neatly, too deliberately. And then she saw it. A leather collar, worn, stiff with age, but still intact. On the brass tag, barely legible through grime, was a single word, Ranger. Jenny's breath caught in her throat. I've seen this before, she whispered. Harper turned. You sure? She nodded slowly. It was hanging on the wall at Brook Pines. Danielle used to say she didn't need a leash for him, but she kept the collar around as a reminder of where he came from. She told me once that he'd flunked out of police dog training. Too emotional, they said. Too attached. But that's what made him perfect for the residents. He wasn't trained to obey. He was trained to care. Jenny stood up and looked toward Ranger, who was still standing at the entrance, staring not at her, not at Harper, but at a tree just outside the structure. One paw lifted. A low, uncertain whimper escaped his throat. Harper caught it too. He's found something. Ranger stepped outside slowly, nose to the earth now, tail still, his every movement careful. Jenny followed, her boots sinking slightly into the wet ground as she moved to his side. Ranger sniffed a patch of soil near the base of a bent tree, then began pawing gently, almost hesitantly, as if he was afraid of what he might uncover. A few inches down, something caught the light. Jenny knelt beside him and brushed aside the dirt with her gloved hands. It was fabric cotton, bright blue. She pulled carefully, and as more of it came free, her heart dropped. It was a small piece of a child's shirt ripped, smeared with a streak of red that hadn't yet dried completely. "Maya's?" Harper said softly from behind her. "It's fresh." Jenny swallowed hard, feeling something cold and metallic press behind her ribs. Fear, maybe, or something worse, recognition. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl, but his eyes were locked on the cloth, and in them, Jenny saw something more than alertness. She saw grief, not frantic or wild, but quiet, focused. The kind of sorrow that doesn't shout but lingers, that doesn't demand attention but can't be ignored. She touched the edge of the fabric and whispered, "How long have you been coming back here?" Ranger sat down, ears still perked, eyes still fixed on that single spot of dirt. Jenny felt something shift inside her. She had buried her own grief years ago, packed it in tight, and sealed it with duty. Her father had died just a mile from here, fighting a fire he thought he could outrun. She never came back, never visited the site, never allowed herself to feel what had really broken that day. But now, standing beside this dog, watching him remember, watching him hold still in the presence of something painful, she felt it stir again. Grief. Not just for her father, but for all the things that didn't get closure. Ranger moved slightly, pressing his nose to the fabric one last time before looking at her. Their eyes met, and in that moment Jenny realized he wasn't just searching for Maya. He was mourning Danielle. Harper walked over, his face tight. "I radioed for a forensics team. They'll need to comb this place." But if this is where he was keeping Maya, Jenny stood, dusting off her gloves. "Then she's not far." Harper looked at Ranger. "You think he's got more to show us?" Jenny didn't answer. Instead, she reached down and gently touched Ranger's head. "You're not just leading us," she said softly. "You're retracing everything. Every mistake. Every moment you couldn't stop." Ranger leaned slightly into her hand, just for a second. Then he stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. His head turned slightly left, his body alert again. Jenny followed. The sound of water grew louder with each step. Somewhere ahead, a creek ran cold and quick, fed by the melting snow in the higher hills. The air was changing to cooler, sharper, laced with the scent of wet stone and pine. Ranger picked up his pace. His body moved like a compass needle that had found true north. No more hesitation. No more glancing back. He moved with certainty now, his paws barely making a sound on the soft forest floor. Jenny and Harper followed as fast as the terrain would allow, ducking beneath low branches and stepping carefully around tangled roots. The trail narrowed between two craggy outcrops, the kind where sound bounced and twisted. The moment they passed through, Jenny heard it something faint, like the hiss of fire and the clink of metal. Harper raised a hand. They stopped. Up ahead, maybe 30 feet down a shallow decline, smoke curled faintly from a small fire pit beside a cluster of rocks near the stream. And beside it, movement. A man, thin, hunched, wearing a gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His back was turned, and he crouched near the fire, poking at something with a stick. His movements were slow, oddly calm. Jenny's eyes scanned quickly, and that's when she saw her. Nestled between the base of the rock wall and a fallen log, barely visible beneath layers of blanket and shadows, was a child. Maya. She was bound at the wrists and ankles with rough braided cord, her knees pulled up to her chest, her small body trembling so violently that Jenny could see it from where she stood. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, her lips cracked and pale. But she was alive, and Ranger had already seen her. Before either Harper or Jenny could speak, the Pitbull surged forward. Not in a blind sprint, not in a snarl of rage, but with deliberate purpose. His body lowered, muscles tight, a low growl building from his chest like thunder still trapped in the clouds. The man Raymond Tucker turned at the sound. His eyes were wild and unfocused, his hair matted against his forehead, and in his right hand, gleaming faintly in the firelight, was a knife. Jenny's heart kicked against her ribs. "Tucker!" Harper barked, stepping out from the trees, gun drawn and aimed steadily. Drop it. Raymond twitched but didn't run. He took a step back instead, closer to Maya. Ranger let out a deeper growl now, teeth bared, planting himself between the girl and the man. It was a sound that sent shivers through Jenny's spine, not because it was violent, but because it was protective, controlled. The kind of sound a soldier makes when standing between danger and someone they were born to defend. Raymond's eyes flicked between the dog and the two officers. He was sweating despite the cold. His hand trembled. She wasn't supposed to scream, he muttered, voice low and raspy. I told her, I said. Someone would come. Someone always comes when they cry. Jenny inched to the left, flanking. Then you knew what you were doing, she said coldly. Let her go. He shook his head. They never listened to me. Not before. But this one, she did. The dog he watched stayed right there. Like he knew I didn't mean to hurt her. Then prove it, Harper said, stepping closer. Drop the knife. Raymond hesitated. Ranger barked once, short and sharp, a sound that echoed like a warning bell through the trees. And Raymond froze. For a moment, everything held still, the fire crackling, the creek rushing, the breath of the forest waiting. Then, slowly, Raymond's fingers opened. The knife fell into the dirt with a dull thud. Harper moved instantly, crossing the ground in 5 strides. He kicked the weapon away, grabbed the man's arm, and twisted him face down onto the ground. The cuffs clicked into place with a sound that brought a wave of relief. Jenny was already moving. She reached Maya in 3 seconds, dropping to her knees and slicing the cords with a utility blade. The girl flinched, curling tighter, but didn't scream. Just a soft, hoarse whisper, "Please don't hurt him." Jenny blinked. "Hurt who, sweetie?" She pointed a trembling finger. "The dog. He stayed with me. He didn't sleep. Not even once." Tears ran down Jenny's face before she could stop them. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Maya collapsed into her arms, sobbing silently, clinging to her like a life raft. Ranger patted over slowly, his tail still, his breathing heavy. He sat beside Maya and pressed his head gently against her shoulder. The girl turned and buried her face in his fur. Jenny couldn't move. She watched the two of them, one small and broken, the other battered and silent, and something inside her cracked. All these years, she had buried her father's memory beneath stoicism and uniforms and neat little boxes of logic, told herself it was just the job, that grief didn't belong in the field. But now, as Maya's small hands clutched at Ranger's fur, as the dog closed his eyes like he had finally exhaled, for the first time in days, Jenny saw something she hadn't let herself believe in a long time. Healing. Not the quick kind, not the kind that's written in reports or wrapped in bandages. The kind that grows from knowing someone stayed, even when they didn't have to. She looked at Ranger, reached forward, and placed her hand on his head. "You did what I couldn't do," she whispered. "You stayed." The Pitbull opened his eyes and looked at her, tired, unwavering, and full of something that looked too human to be instinct alone. Jenny smiled through her tears. "Good boy," she said. "You brought her home." The forest had fallen quiet after Maya was rescued, but not in the way it does when a danger passes. It was quieter than that, deeper, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, listening for what came next. The ambulance had already taken Maya away. Harper had escorted Raymond Tucker in cuffs to the main road, where state troopers waited to transfer him to holding. A forensics team would arrive by midday to document the site, but Ranger stayed behind. He hadn't moved far from the clearing. Even after the fire was put out and the sounds of shouting faded, he remained on the edge of the woods, standing perfectly still. His ears weren't perked. His tail didn't wag. He wasn't alert in the usual way. He was remembering. Jenny didn't call him back. She knew better now. Instead, she followed from a respectful distance, as Ranger began to move again, this time not with urgency, but with a slow, weighted kind of knowing. His paws pressed into the soft earth, careful but deliberate, like he'd made this walk before. She didn't need to ask where they were going. They traveled in silence for nearly 15 minutes, deeper into the charred parts of the forest where the light struggled to break through the canopy. The trees here bore the scars of old firebark, blackened, limbs skeletal, some leaning in odd directions like they were trying to hold each other up. Then Ranger stopped. He sat down beside the gnarled roots of a large pine tree, long dead but still standing. At its base, just behind a fallen log, the soil had a faint rise to it. Nothing dramatic. No marker. No obvious sign. But it was there. Jenny stepped closer, her breath catching when she saw it. A shallow mound, covered in moss and pine needles, undisturbed by animal prints or weather erosion. Ranger placed one paw gently on the mound, and that's when Jenny knew. She knelt beside him. "Is this where she is?" she whispered. The dog didn't move. He didn't look at her, but he stayed, and that was answer enough. Jenny radioed it in, her voice soft and respectful, like she was speaking in a church. Harper responded with quiet confirmation. He already knew too. Hours later, forensic teams confirmed what she had already felt in her bones. DNA, taken from the remains beneath the tree, matched Danielle Reed, missing for nearly 2 years, presumed dead but never found. Her body had been buried just a few hundred yards from the makeshift shelter. The man who put her there, Raymond, gave his confession without much resistance. Said it was a fight that got out of hand, that she fell, that he panicked. No one believed it was an accident, not fully, but there wasn't enough left to argue beyond that. There were no dramatic court speeches, no headlines shouting vengeance, just the truth, soft and devastating. Danielle was gone, but Ranger had never left. He had come back to that grave every morning, through storms, through frost, through seasons that changed and forgot. He remembered when no one else did. Not out of loyalty, but love. Not out of hope, but responsibility. Jenny sat next to him later that day, after everyone else had left. The air smelled of wet pine and ash. She watched the way Ranger laid his body down beside the spot. Not curled for rest, but stretched out like a guard, like someone keeping watch. She ran her fingers through the thick fur along his back. It was coarse and matted in places, worn thin in others. He bore the marks of time, scars that no vet would stitch, the kind only carried by those who had stayed too long in the dark. "You could have left," she whispered. Anytime Ranger didn't look at her, you could have run, started over, found someone else to feed you, someone who didn't remind you of her. Still, the dog remained still, eyes on the tree line, as if waiting for something only he could see. Jenny's voice trembled. "But you didn't. You stayed." And in that moment, she saw something in him, something beyond training, beyond instinct. Forgiveness. Not in the loud, absolving kind people seek from each other, but the quiet kind. The kind that lets grief soften instead of destroy. The kind that knows remembering someone isn't the same as being broken by them. "You didn't stay here for justice," she said. "You stayed for her. And for you," the wind stirred slightly through the trees. A single pine cone dropped nearby, thudding softly into the moss. Jenny looked back toward the old trail, barely visible now through years of neglect. "How many times have you walked this alone?" she asked. Ranger shifted his head slightly but didn't rise. "You didn't forget," she murmured, "but you didn't grow bitter. You remembered, and you waited. Not for revenge, just for someone to listen." Her eyes welled with tears again. She didn't try to stop them this time. "You remind me of him," she added, barely audible. "My dad. He didn't run either. Stayed to fight the fire. Stayed to protect." She paused, placing her hand gently over Ranger's paw. "He didn't make it. But maybe that's what this is. All of this. The things we lose. They come back in different forms. Different shapes." The dog blinked slowly, finally lifting his head to look at her. And for the first time, Jenny didn't just see a dog. She saw a keeper of promises, a guardian of memories, a living, breathing monument to the truth that love, even the kind without words, doesn't end with death. It lingers, waits, watches. And when the time is right, it shows someone the way. "You're not just remembering," she whispered. "You're reminding us." She leaned down and rested her forehead gently against his. Not to forget, the sun had started to rise behind the mountains, casting golden slivers of light across the burned landscape. And in that light, the forest, though wounded, didn't look quite so lifeless anymore. It looked still, but not broken. And for the first time in years, Jenny felt that way too. Spring arrived quietly in Elk Valley, the way it always did, more a feeling in the air than a change in the trees. The last snow had melted into the creek beds, and the frost-hardened earth had begun to breathe again. The forest was still scarred in places, its blackened trunks a reminder of what had been lost. But there were signs of new life, two tiny green shoots pushing up through the ash, birdsong returning in hesitant flutters. And just on the edge of that forest, beside the fire station where he had first arrived with a bloodied backpack clutched in his jaw, Ranger had found a home. The crew had built him a small room off the back of the station, not a kennel, but a space with a thick mattress, a window that faced the trees, and a wooden plaque above the door that read, Ranger's Post. He never asked for attention. He didn't seek out the visitors who brought toys or treats. But he didn't hide anymore either. He was there when they opened the station in the morning, waiting at the gate when school children walked by and waved, and every dawn, without fail, he walked to the tree line. He didn't linger as long these days. Just a few minutes, staring quietly into the woods, as if checking that everything was still where he left it. Then he would turn and make his way back, slow but steady. Jenny watched him each morning from the break room window. She never interrupted that ritual. It wasn't just habit, she knew that now. It was reverence. And each time she saw him walk back toward the station, she felt something shift in her chest. A quiet loosening. The kind of breath you didn't realize you were holding for years. Maya was healing too. Her recovery had been slow, cautious. For weeks after the rescue, she barely spoke above a whisper. She flinched at sudden noises and refused to sleep in her own bed. But her family wrapped her in love and steadiness, and slowly she began to return to herself. One afternoon, Jenny received a manila envelope at the station with Maya's name in the corner, drawn in crayon. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper, on which Maya had drawn a picture with watercolor and pencil. It showed a large dog sitting beneath a gnarled tree. His eyes were closed, and in the curve of his body sat a small girl, resting her head on his side. Above them, in careful block letters, were the words, "Some angels don't fly. They wait." Jenny kept the drawing taped to the wall of Ranger's room. She didn't need to explain it to anyone. Anyone who knew Ranger understood. One warm day in early May, a woman arrived at the station quiet, with soft eyes and a tired smile. She was holding a small, dented tin box wrapped in cloth. She introduced herself simply. "My name is Cora Reed. Danielle was my sister." The entire room fell silent. Jenny led her inside, and Cora knelt gently beside Ranger, who watched her with curiosity. She opened the box and took out an old photograph, faded and curled at the edges, but still clear. It showed a younger Danielle, sitting beneath a tree, with Ranger curled at her feet. Her hand was resting on his head. Both of them looked peaceful. On the back of the photo, written in Danielle's careful cursive, were the words, "He never left. He just waited until someone listened." Cora placed the photo on the shelf next to Maya's drawing. Then she leaned in and whispered something into Ranger's ear. Jenny didn't ask what it was. Some things weren't meant to be repeated. Later that evening, after the station had quieted down, Jenny sat with Ranger on the back steps. The sky was streaked with soft gold, and the woods beyond the clearing shimmered in the last light of day. "You know," she said gently, "you didn't just save Maya." Ranger lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. "You saved me too," she continued. "You reminded me that some losses don't have to break us, that some memories don't have to hurt. Not forever," she smiled, brushing her hand across his back. "You showed us that staying even when it's hard is its own kind of courage." Ranger didn't respond. He didn't have to. The fire chief had offered to submit Ranger's name for a formal commendation. There was even talk of a medal, a ceremony, a press event. But Jenny had gently declined. Ranger didn't need a medal. He had a room with his name on the door, a station full of people who now watched the woods with more compassion, a little girl who painted his face into every drawing of a hero, and a quiet tree where the wind still carried a promise only he had kept. He had done enough. The town never forgot him. Each spring, they began marking a day on the calendar, Ranger's Day, not with speeches or banners, but with quiet walks into the woods. Families would bring flowers and leave them at the edge of the forest. Children left hand-drawn cards. Some brought their own dogs and told them stories about the dog who waited. And still, every morning, Ranger made his way to the trees. Even as he grew older, his steps slower, his breathing deeper, he never missed a day. It wasn't mourning anymore. It wasn't grief. It was remembrance. Jenny would watch from the station and whisper the same thing under her breath each time. You kept the promise, because in the end, it was never about applause. Never about recognition. It was about the kind of love that stays quiet. The kind that doesn't need words or fanfare. The kind that waits, no matter how long it takes. Some heroes wear uniforms, some carry radios and badges, and some just remember. If you've stayed with us through this journey, thank you. Ranger's story isn't just about finding a missing girl. It's about something deeper. It's about the promises we keep long after others have forgotten. About how grief doesn't always howl. Sometimes it waits. As Maya healed and Jenny found peace, Ranger taught them and us that some heroes wear fur and scars instead of medals. That in a world rushing to move on, there's a quiet courage in staying. Here at Vale Marks, we believe that stories like this matter. Stories that remind us of who we were raised to be. As Maya's drawing said, some angels don't fly. They wait. And sometimes, they lead us back to the parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. As Maya Angelou once said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. If this story made you feel something, anything, please consider subscribing to Vale Marks. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can continue creating more meaningful, heartfelt content like this. Leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Your support is more than numbers. It's a reason to keep going, because every story we tell is a light someone out there is still waiting to see.